Funding for To the Contrary provided by the E. Rhodes and Leona B. Carpenter Foundation, the Park Foundation, and the Charles A. Freoff Foundation.
This week on To the Contrary, the fire hose of lawsuits unleashed by the Trump campaign and the Republican National Committee, challenging voting rules and longstanding practices ahead of the upcoming elections. Hello, I'm Bonnie Urbay. Welcome to the Contrary, a weekly discussion of news and social trends from diverse perspectives. Republicans have filed a flurry of lawsuits challenging voting rules and practices ahead of next month's elections, setting the stage for what could be a far larger and more contentious legal battle over the White House after Election Day and the closing arguments of the Trump campaign. 2 weeks ago, we interviewed the head of the NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund on this and other topics. Today, we welcome Mailman, director of the Independent Women's Law Center, on this topic and on others. May was a legal advisor to former President Trump. While in the White House, she also worked in the Office of the Chief of Staff. After the White House, May was Deputy Solicitor General for the state of Ohio. Welcome, May. Good to see you.
Hi, Bonnie.
Voting rights experts say lawsuits brought by the Trump campaign and the GOP appear to be an effort to prepare to challenge the results of the presidential election after Election Day. Should former President Donald Trump, the Republican nominee, lose and refuse to accept his defeat, as he did 4 years ago? Do you see the purpose of these lawsuits similarly or differently?
Well, I definitely see them differently, but I guess high level, an election challenge is not in itself a bad thing. A bad election is a bad thing, right? So an election challenge, if it's frivolous, that's bad. But if it's actually just trying to get to the accurate election results, is a good thing. Recently in Bridgeport, Connecticut, there was a woman that was just stuffing ballots in a drop box. And of course, you didn't have true evidence of fraud. Maybe these were correct ballots, where did she get but they just decided to redo it anyway because it was so bad. And so in that case, a challenge is a good thing because it gives people confidence that the primary was actually accurate. So I don't think we can just say a challenge is bad. A bad election is bad, and a challenge can be a good thing if it's in service of that. But what is the purpose of these current cases? It is not to make it easier to challenge the election on the back end. I think it is always going to be hard to challenge an election on the back end. It is to create as clean, as legal, as trustworthy of an election as possible so that you do not have certainly frivolous, but hopefully no election challenges on the back end. Of course, no election challenges on the back end means that everything is perfect and this is life and life isn't perfect. But I do think that the point is to minimize the questions that can be asked after an election.
Why do you think the Georgia electors, 3 of whom were Trump supporters, voted to do a hand ballot count, which of course last week was thrown out by the Georgia Supreme Court? How is that supposed to make it? The court believed it would make things way more chaotic. So tell me about why you think this is going to make it more accurate. And also, hand ballot counts are less accurate than machine counts.
Well, I definitely agree with you that if you're talking about somebody trying to count all the dots, millions of dots, that is a horrible idea. But actually what was being proposed in Georgia is that the number of ballots match the number of ballots that went through the scanner, because actually in the 2020 election, there was evidence, this did happen, that some ballots were scanned multiple times. They caught it and it worked out. But I do think that people in general are concerned that ballots, if you, did I already scan this? What did I do with this? just to have the number of ballots match the number of ballots that were scanned. I don't actually think that that's a bad rule, a stupid rule, a particularly hard to manage rule. And yet you had two different courts say that they couldn't do this. One court said,
and by the way, Brad Raffensperger, the Georgia Secretary of State, and the Attorney General of the state both informed the Electoral Board that what they were doing was not constitutional.
It's funny. I think that that's pretty arguable. And I would say that actually the liberal position would be to allow this type of rule by the state elections board, because in general, I think that conservatives want to have more control in a legislative body, right, and less control in an administrative body. And so that's exactly what the Attorney General was saying was, hey, there's a general grant of power here to the Elections Board to kind of make our elections better, but that general grant of power can't be interpreted to do this. I don't know. I mean, state elections boards do a lot of things.
I have a different view. I just want to ask you about of what what the Democratic Party wanted in this case. They don't want confusion after the, you say they want to have it in a legislative body, not an administrative body. But the fact is they sure as heck didn't want Dobbs going to the states. They that just flies in the face of a lot of their positions. Tell me about that.
If I'm looking at judges and whether judges think that you have to have a really strong textual basis in order to do something, let's even take something like Dobbs. The Constitution doesn't say abortion in it anywhere. I mean, it doesn't have a trimester system. It doesn't have undue burden, right? And so if you want the power to be with the people in dictating what the laws are, then you're going to say, well, the legislature is the body that is the democratic body, and that's the body that should speak. They never said that. And so that in this Georgia case, okay, if the people of Georgia want to count the number of ballots, then the people of Georgia can vote for that and they can have a law to that extent.
And why would the leader of the party, the former president, and the GOP itself, the Republican National Committee, file this time 3 to 4 times as many election law challenges as they did in 2020? When in 2020 they filed 62, they lost 61. Now, as of last week anyway, it was up to 185 legal challenges. Explain to me, and also as one who has covered presidential elections since 1976, yes, in the Bush v. Gore case that went to the Supreme Court and Gore lost, there was a substantial election challenge. But generally speaking, over the years, Americans are not people who don't trust their electoral systems.
No, and hopefully that continues, that we don't have a reason to trust our election system. And I think that that's a good thing. And when I think about why a lot of, especially Republicans, don't trust elections, it's because of a lot of litigation from the left that sought to change laws. And this was especially in 2020. So Mark Elias, if we want to talk about failed election challenges, Mark Elias spent tens of millions of dollars to lose 7 cases for every one that he won in the run-up to election. So we want to talk about losing. It is the left bringing pre-election challenges where they would challenge everything from voter ID to registration deadlines, ballot receipt deadlines, signature matching, all of these sorts of things, and lost time and time and time again until the Supreme Court had to say, please stop saying that everything is racist. I mean, that is the basis of your complaint. Oh, you have to have an ID in order to turn something in. Well, that's racist. The Supreme Court had to really put the brakes on that. But why do we see a lot more challenges now than after the election? I think because the system is working.
The vast majority of the cases, I mean, just about all the Democrats have responded certainly to the challenges waged by President Trump, former President Trump, but they have not seen anything like this number of filings ever in American history.
What? I don't know if that's I
185
don't think
lawsuits.
that that's true.
185 lawsuits.
Yeah, I would say that that's eclipsed by the number that's brought by groups on the left, from the ACLU to the NAACP to the DNC to the Sierra Club. To, there are tons of groups on the left who are constantly challenging vet votes, existing law. And so when you look at what these Republican challenges look like, they're pretty narrow. It's things like, hey, you are supposed to have an equal number of poll workers who are Republican and Democrats. Instead, you have a 8-to-1 ratio. You've got a 6-to-1 ratio. That is not parity. And of course, sometimes it's not going to be exactly equal. You've got more Democrats living, but you can't have it that much. So it's things like that where you've got a law that says something and it's just trying to enforce the law. So I think that's very different of, you have a law, you need to enforce it, versus I think a lot of the times on the left, it's, I don't like this law. I'm going to get rid of this signature matching requirement. I'm going to get rid of this voter ID requirement. And those are the types of challenges I think that really make people question the outcome of their elections.
Well, but voter ID requirements are set by states, by the state legislatures, correct?
Yes, and that's what the Democrats like to challenge.
Okay, but
in multiple states.
Why is it that tell me the basis of, what's the difference between the basis of these Democratic challenges you're referring to and the basis of what the Republicans are trying to do in this election?
Let's start with the Democrats and then they'll move to the Republicans. So for example, take the state of Ohio or the state of Georgia. A lot of these states that have somewhat recently enacted election integrity laws, we'll call them, but they do things like add a voter ID requirement, say that if you're a ballot harvester, you can only do 10 ballots at a time, or, something like that. Things that you can help manage what's going on in your election. And I think the common arguments are a couple of things. One is that it violates the Voting Rights Act because it's racist, essentially, that somehow by the color of your skin, it is harder to get a driver's license, which of course is a pretty racist thing itself to say, but that's one basis. And then the other is that you can't actually just burden the vote unnecessarily, so that you can achieve election integrity, but you can't do it at the expense of making it super hard to vote. And so these are
it is
kind of
true. It is true, is it not, that there are more impediments in the way of people of color and poor people getting to vote than there are for white people or wealthy people?
I mean, I don't think that if you are Black, it's hard to get a driver's license. I think that if you show up to the DMV, despite the color of your skin, you're going to get that driver's license.
Well, right. But I'm talking about things like mail-in ballots. And if you have a construction job, for the most part, if you have a factory job, wherever you have jobs where you have to show up every day or the work just doesn't get done, why not allow people to mail in ballots? Why not allow them to vote ahead of time?
I mean, it's easier to vote than ever before. And so the idea that there's been this like huge, President Joe Biden went down to Georgia and said that its election integrity law was Jim Crow 2.0. And Georgia has broken every single record as far as early voting, explaining how easy it is to vote. I mean, part of the Department of Justice's challenge against Georgia was that Georgia now doesn't allow people to essentially bribe people in line. You can't give people snacks in line. And they challenged the no snacks in line provision as if the Constitution of the United States says that you have to have snacks in line. I mean, these are crazy things.
Most of the laws, the cases that were dismissed, the 61 out of the 62 in 2020, filed by the Trump campaign and the GOP, were dismissed for lack of evidence or lack of standing.
After elections, it is going to be very, very difficult to challenge cases. Let's take Stacey Abrams. Stacey Abrams did not concede her 2018 gubernatorial race. She's an election denier. Why? Because she said that there was vote suppression going on, that there were people who wanted to vote, but because Georgia didn't let them vote, that's why she lost. Okay, so she raised almost $100 million.
That's a more material fact, I should think, than saying that voters should have to present identification to vote.
These are talking about different things. I'm talking about post-election challenges. Post-election challenges versus pre-election challenges just live in different universes, because pre-election challenges say that these laws shouldn't exist. Post-election challenges generally say, because of something I lost. And so the because of something I lost challenge is always going to be very difficult. So I'm just taking Stacey Abrams' case where she said that there was vote suppression. It is hard to bring post-election challenges. And I think that the Trump campaign found that out. And so the hope is you're not bringing post-election challenges. These are not likely to succeed. It's really hard to prove fraud. Having the election over again for the United States of America presidential race is impossible. It is impossible. And so no judge is going to say, you know what? I think I found enough fraud. Let's just redo it. Let's just redo it. Like, they're never going to say that. And so that's why post-election challenges are just not likely to succeed.
Okay, but it is easier, do you not agree, to suppress the vote of people, particularly people with no money. It doesn't matter even what race they are, but they happen to be, low-income people happen to be disproportionately Black and of color. So
there's a difference between voter suppression, which I think brings up Jim Crow and the types of suppressive tactics that were used to deny people the right to vote, including such things as, like, tell me how many beans are in this counter, otherwise you can't vote. And like, if you were white, they would let you vote if you're close enough, and if you're Black, you couldn't. Voter suppression is illegal and should not happen, and it is unfortunate that in our nation it ever happened. The fact that early voting is 14 days versus 15 days, okay, those are the types of challenges that we're facing. And to say, well, a 14-day window suppresses Black people in a way that a 15-day window is not. It's like, to me, that's actually offensive to the memory of what was happening to people. And to say that somehow Black people are unable to get their ballot in one day earlier is just like almost flooring to me how these lawsuits are.
Well, not if,
raised.
For example, they've been illegally taken off the voter rolls in advance. But I want to get to one last thing, because you're talking about illegal practices. Do you think what Elon Musk is doing, paying people, he says to sign a petition, but actually, in order to sign that petition, you have to register to vote. So I heard one legal commentator say that he's violating the very basis of the law that says you can't pay people to vote. Do you think he'll end up being prosecuted for that?
Who knows?
Should he be? Should he be?
I don't think so. I would have to look into the history of FEC enforcing these types of things. But, I'm reminded of in DC, after you voted, you could have access to any number of, like, sweet green salad or like little fun freebies. And you had to have voted, right? That they would get you on the back end, but they weren't exactly paying you to vote. They weren't saying, like, here's some money or here's a salad, go vote. It was just meant to be part of the atmosphere. And I think actually Elon's is less than that. These are previously registered voters. This is not, here's some money. And
but if they want the money, they have to go register to vote to sign. He asked them to sign this petition. You have to be registered to vote to sign that petition.
Yeah,
so it's a backdoor way of paying people to register to vote.
I think there's the same exact distinction with what I just described, right? So you've already voted and now you get the salad, okay? And that's a 1-to-1. Now, that's not a lottery to win the salad. You actually do get any of the foods or any of the, like, masks or the tape measures or whatever. But it's not saying I'm paying you to do this. It's now that you've done this, you can not register, but you can actually have this. And I think that's the same thing that I see with Elon. It's not, hey, here's something to go do it. It's now that you are part of this community, now that you're part of this voting community, now that you're part of this registered community, you can sign this petition. But the thing that you actually have to do is sign the petition.
Let's switch to a couple of questions about how Donald Trump is winding up his campaign. Do you think he's persuading voters to vote for him with the memory lapses, with the changes in position? He was against mail-in ballots for the longest time. And more recently, earlier this year, he switched to being for them. And then just last week, he switched again to being against them. Is that a good way to wind up your campaign?
Donald Trump's position has always been a little bit the same, which is, unclear in the sense that he wants people, if they're going to vote for him however, right? If that's mail, if that's early, like if you're going to vote for me, vote for me. But on the other hand, the expert at Heritage always gives this example. If you had one lottery ticket and you had to get it into the lottery commission, otherwise you didn't get your money, would you send it in the mail or would you show up in person? And it's like, I would show up in person. I don't want this to be lost. And I think that's the thing with mail-in ballots. It's like, I want to trust it and I probably could, but just to be sure, like, why don't you eliminate that and just go in person? So I think there's this tension of like, vote for me however you can. But on the other hand, if this is your one lottery ticket, is this how you would want to treat it? So is that unclear? Perhaps, but I think everybody, a Republican enthusiasm for early voting certainly is indicated. So the Republicans are voting in larger numbers early than certainly previously.
But the early numbers as of last week show most early 2/3 of all early votes were Democratic in the in some of the, not all of the, but some of the battleground states.
Republicans are not going to catch Democrat numbers by the end, and still people like to vote in person. I don't think that that's just a distrust. I think there's something communal and there's something that feels democratic about showing up in person, casting your ballot with full information alongside your neighbors, that people enjoy, election day is an enjoyable experience in that sense. And then there's working people who say, oh my gosh, the line, the traffic, like, what if it rains? What if my kids are screaming? Like, so, enjoying that element of democracy does drive a lot of people, but of course it doesn't drive everybody. But as far as Trump's closing pitch to voters, I don't think that it's memory lapses that's his closing pitch. I think that we see I think the joy is now with the Trump campaign. I'm just thinking, for example, of
I'm sorry, the what
joy.
is joy?
Right? Like
J-O-Y?
J-O-Y, what
Okay.
Kamala Harris was campaigning on for ages, right? That it no longer seems joyful from Kamala Harris versus President Trump putting on an apron and going to McDonald's. Yes, this was all screened by the Secret Service, but like watching Trump salt some fries is hilarious. Like it is just classic.
But is being
Trump
hilarious a man who has said that he will be a dictator, and John Kelly, who was his chief of staff longer than anybody else, came out last week saying that he was a fascist. He did not believe in the rule of law. He was a big fan of Adolf Hitler, etc. Should you be paying attention to him putting on an apron and cooking McDonald's food, or should you be paying to what is coming out of his mouth?
I worked for John Kelly. I know John Kelly. I think that he is a really good person, and that he cares about his country. He's given everything. His son died fighting for our country. This is a genuinely good person who people should listen to. But people who work, for that long of a time, that close to somebody, can end up really not liking them. And I think you can let your personal distaste for somebody color a larger decision. And
but his personal taste was based on him seeing Donald Trump in action, acting like a fascist, praising Hitler, and having no respect for the rule of law. So, I mean, how could anybody like somebody when they see that happening?
Yeah, and I don't think that he's come out and said like he's going to vote for Kamala or anybody, but that he just didn't like the way that Donald Trump operated all the time. And of course, a lot of us don't like the way that Donald Trump operated all the time. I think the run up to January 6th felt whiny and it felt sort of not presidential. And I think that we can all acknowledge that. But I do think that at the end of the day, you have to vote for somebody who you think on balance is better than the other person. And it doesn't require me saying that somebody is perfect. And I don't think anybody who votes for Donald Trump actually thinks that he's perfect. It really is, between Kamala and Donald Trump, who's going to be better for the future of our country.
Thank you, Mailman. Excellent presentation of the Republican perspective on these issues, which are gripping the country right now. That's it for this edition of To the Contrary. Keep the conversation going on our social media platform. Reach out to us at To the Contrary and visit our website, the address on the screen. And whether you agree or think to the contrary, we'll see you next time.
Funding for To the Contrary provided by the E. Rhodes and Leona B. Carpenter Foundation, the Park Foundation, and the Charles A. Freoff Foundation. For a transcript or to see an online version of this episode of To the Contrary, please visit our PBS website at pbs.org/To the Contrary.
You're watching PBS.